I never imagined that the sound of a front door opening could echo so loudly through my memory. It wasn't just a door. It was the sound of my entire family deciding I no longer belonged with them. It was the sound of years of shared history collapsing into silence. When I walked into that house in Georgia for Thanksgiving, I expected awkward tension. I expected cold looks. I even expected a few snide comments under someone's breath. What I did not expect was that every single person I had known and loved would stand up, place their napkins down with perfect calm, and walk out of the room without a single word. That is how it started. One step through the door, one heartbeat of hope, and then the slow, deliberate sound of chair legs scraping against hardwood floors as my entire family stood and left me there. I keep replaying that moment in my head like a movie. The way the golden light from the dining room chandelier fell over the turkey. The way the smell of roasted vegetables, butter, and cinnamon pie wrapped around me as I stepped inside. The way my mother's crystal glasses were already filled with sparkling cider because she didn't like alcohol at holiday gatherings. The way my father's carved turkey knife sat on the cutting board, ready for him to make the first slice. It was picture perfect. That house had always been perfect. My parents built it to be the center of everything they wanted their family to be. Every corner of that place screamed control. Every detail whispered tradition, and I walked right into it thinking maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because what happened that night wasn't just about a dinner. It was about years of control, about money, about family image, and about me finally refusing to play a role they wrote for me. They decided to humiliate me in silence. I decided not to let it be the end. The drive to Georgia had been long. I left my apartment before dawn, the kind of cold November morning where your breath fogs up the air the second you open the car door. My hands shook when I started the engine. I kept telling myself I was doing the right thing. I had spent 3 years staying away from them after everything that happened with my sister. I had told myself I would never set foot in that house again, but when the invitation came in the mail, handwritten by my mother with a little gold leaf sticker on the envelope, I felt something old tug at me. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was the stupid part of me that still wanted a family. I packed a bag. I told myself it was just dinner. The highway felt endless. Trees passed in dark green blurs. I stopped twice for gas, even though I didn't need it, just to delay the moment I'd have to face them. I listened to old songs, the kind my father used to play when we took trips as kids. Every note made my chest tighten. I thought about turning around more than once, but some part of me needed to prove that I wasn't afraid of them anymore, that I could walk into that house on my own terms, that their power over me was gone. When I reached the old neighborhood, the sun was dipping low, throwing long orange shadows across the lawns. All the houses looked the same as they always had. Perfect lawns, white porch columns, the kind of quiet that never felt peaceful, only judgmental. And then there it was, my parents' house, the house with the pale blue shutters and the wraparound porch my father always bragged about. I used to love that house. I used to run across that porch barefoot in the summer. I used to sit on the steps and watch fireflies with my sister before we both grew up and became enemies. The driveway was full of cars, my brother's truck, my sister's silver SUV, my cousin's sedan, my grandparents' ancient green car. Every single one of them was there. The family had gathered like nothing ever happened, like I hadn't been branded the traitor 3 years ago. I parked on the street. I sat in the car with my hands on the steering wheel for 5 full minutes, just breathing. I knew the story they told about me. I knew the whispers. I knew that in their version of the past, I was the one who destroyed everything. But I also knew the truth. I didn't destroy anything. I only ripped off the mask. 3 years ago, my sister pulled the biggest lie the family had ever seen. She faked a marriage to get access to part of the family trust fund. My parents had set that trust fund up when we were little. It was supposed to be for education, emergencies, or long-term investments. But the rules were strict, and my father liked control more than anything. So my sister married a man she never actually intended to live with. It was a fake marriage with forged paperwork. She pocketed hundreds of thousands of dollars. And no one was supposed to know. But I found out. And I exposed it. They said I ruined her life. They said I shamed the family. They said I should have kept quiet because family protects family. But I wasn't going to let them turn me into their silent accomplice. I told the lawyer who managed the trust. I gave him everything I had. And when my father tried to cover it up, it was too late. The trust was frozen for years. The family lost access. The image cracked. My sister was humiliated. And they decided I was the villain. The porch creaked under my shoes as I walked up. I could see the light in the dining room through the big front window. Everyone was already seated. It looked like something out of one of those glossy holiday cards. My father at the head of the table, my sister on his right, my brother on his left. My mother near the turkey, my grandparents at their usual spots. My cousins squeezed in along the sides. Laughter floated through the glass, muffled but sharp. For a second, my heart almost softened. They looked like a family. My family. And then I remembered how quickly they turned on me, how they watched me pack my bags 3 years ago and didn't say a word. I knocked on the door anyway. A soft knock at first, then louder. I heard the laughter die down, the sound of chairs shifting. I gripped the strap of my bag so hard my fingers hurt. When the door opened, it wasn't my mother or my father who answered. It was my sister, the one who had lied. She stood there with perfect hair and a perfect smile that didn't reach her eyes. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The look on her face was clear. I wasn't welcome. I stepped inside anyway. The warmth hit me immediately. That thick, heavy Thanksgiving warmth. Butter and sage and cinnamon. My mother's signature pumpkin pie smell. I left my bag by the door and took off my coat. My sister didn't offer to take it. She just stepped aside. I walked down the hall to the dining room. My heart pounded in my ears. Every step sounded too loud. And then I saw them, all of them. My father with his jaw tight. My mother with that brittle smile she uses when company comes over. My grandparents stiff and polite. My brother avoiding my eyes. My cousins looking like they wanted to disappear. They all saw me, and then it happened. One by one, like they had rehearsed it, they stood up. No shouting, no insults, just silence. My father pushed back his chair. My mother folded her napkin carefully. My sister gave me a look that was almost satisfied. My brother kept his eyes down as he stood. My grandparents moved slowly but deliberately. My cousins followed like sheep. They placed their napkins on the table. Every movement was slow, deliberate, cruel. No one broke eye contact with me except my brother. He couldn't even look at me. And then they turned, and they walked out. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, the sound of the front door opening again, the sound of the night swallowing their voices. I stood there frozen. The turkey sat in the middle of the table. Steam still rose from it. The candles flickered. The cider bubbled in the glasses. The house smelled like everything good about childhood, and it was empty. They had left me standing in the doorway of my own family's Thanksgiving dinner like I was nothing. Like I wasn't even worth a word. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there. My hands started to shake. My throat felt tight. I tried to take a step forward, but my legs wouldn't move. I don't know how long I stood like that. Long enough for the cider bubbles to go flat. Long enough for the candles to start to burn lower. I finally moved to the table and sat in the chair my mother always reserved for me when I was still their good child. I stared at the food, at the perfection of it, at the empty chairs around me. My father's carving knife glinted under the chandelier. It felt like a stage set after the actors had left. Everything still in place. No life. The humiliation burned like acid in my stomach. They didn't yell. They didn't insult me. They didn't argue. They just left. It was colder than any fight we had ever had. It was the kind of cruelty you only learn from people who know exactly how to hurt you. They wanted me to stand there and know I was alone. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to regret every choice I made. They wanted me to crawl back. But I wasn't that person anymore. I poured myself a glass of cider. The sound of the liquid hitting the glass was the only noise in the house. I lifted it and drank. It tasted too sweet. It made me want to spit it out. I set it down and stared at the turkey, at the stuffing, at the pie. I almost laughed. They made a feast and then walked out of it. That was how much they hated me. That was how much they wanted to make a point. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I thought maybe someone had texted me. Maybe my brother. Maybe a cousin. Maybe someone with a shred of decency. But when I checked, it was just a calendar notification. No one had texted me. They weren't coming back. That was the moment something in me shifted. I had spent 3 years staying away, trying to convince myself that maybe someday things would change. That maybe my father would stop seeing me as a traitor. That maybe my sister would admit she was the one who lied. That maybe my mother would stop pretending everything was fine. I thought maybe one holiday could fix what they broke. But standing in that empty room, I realized something. They were never going to forgive me. Not because I was wrong, but because I had stopped letting them control me. I picked up my coat. I didn't rush. I moved slowly, the same way they had. I wanted to feel every second of it. I walked through the hallway, past the family portraits my mother hung up like trophies. My sister's wedding photo, even though the marriage was fake. My father shaking hands with some business partner. Me, as a child, smiling in a photo I didn't remember taking. All of it lined up like a shrine to the image they wanted the world to see. I opened the front door and stepped into the cold night air. My breath came out in white puffs. The driveway was empty now. Every car was gone. They didn't just leave the table. They left the house. I stood on the porch and looked out at the dark neighborhood. Someone down the street was laughing. Somewhere else, a fire crackled. Families were gathering, and mine had decided I didn't exist. It was quiet except for the crickets. I should have felt broken. But underneath the humiliation, underneath the hurt, there was something else. A small, steady flame. Anger. Not the kind that explodes. The kind that burns slow and quiet. The kind that makes you see things clearly. For years they had controlled the story. I was the traitor. My sister was the victim. My father was the disappointed patriarch. My mother was the heartbroken mother. My brother was the loyal son who kept the peace. But they forgot something. I wasn't that scared child anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I had power now, real power, And if they wanted to humiliate me, I was done playing nice. When I got back into my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there in the dark. The house glowed behind me. The windows looked warm. But it was a lie. That house was empty. That family was a lie. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. It wasn't about money for me, but for them, it always had been. They needed me. They had pretended for years that I was expendable, but they needed me. I owned part of that trust. I owned part of the property that my father used for his business deals. I had been quiet about it for years, letting them act like it was theirs. But after that night, I decided that silence was over. I drove back to my apartment with the kind of focus I hadn't felt in a long time. The anger sat warm in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove, mile after mile, headlights cutting through the dark. I remembered every word they had thrown at me 3 years ago. I remembered how they sided with my sister, even when they knew she lied. I remembered how my father said nothing mattered more than family loyalty. What he meant was loyalty to him. I had broken that, and he had never forgiven me. By the time I reached my building, I knew exactly what I was going to do. They thought humiliating me in silence would break me, but it only reminded me of how much they depended on me. They depended on the trust fund I helped protect. They depended on the property my name was on. They depended on the image of a united family. And now I was going to take that away, not out of spite, out of clarity, out of survival. The moment I decided to act wasn't loud. It didn't come with a scream or a slammed door. It came with silence. The same silence they had used to humiliate me. It settled over my apartment like a heavy blanket as I set my keys down on the counter and stared out the window. The city lights looked sharp against the night sky. Somewhere out there, families were sitting around their tables, passing mashed potatoes, laughing, pretending the world was simple. And here I was, alone, breathing through the ache in my chest. But underneath that ache was something steady, a calm that comes only when the decision is already made. I walked to my desk and pulled out the thick file I had kept hidden for years. A file my father pretended didn't exist. He liked to act like I was powerless, but that wasn't true. Years ago, when my grandmother passed away, she left her share of the family trust to me. She didn't trust my father with it. She didn't trust anyone but me. He had never forgiven her for that. He thought he could control me anyway, and for a long time he did. But the moment they stood up and walked out of that dining room, he lost whatever hold he had left. The file was full of legal documents, signatures, and ownership records. My father had set up the trust to make himself the center of everything, but he didn't count on my grandmother giving me her share outright. That meant I could make decisions on my own. I could dissolve things. I could pull funding. I could make their carefully built kingdom crumble. I hadn't done it before because I thought maybe someday we'd fix things. I thought maybe family meant something. I had held on to the hope that if I stayed quiet long enough, they'd come around. But they didn't. They used my silence as proof they were right. I sat at the desk with the file open and felt the weight of years pressed down on me. I thought about how it started, how the entire family had turned into something sharp and cold the day I told the lawyer the truth about my sister. She had been so smug back then. She thought no one would ever find out. She thought my father's power would protect her. She forged documents. She had someone pretend to be her husband. She funneled money into her own accounts. And everyone knew, but pretended not to. That was the family way. Keep the secrets. Protect the image. Lie if you have to. Smile through it. But I couldn't live like that. I couldn't watch her steal from something that was supposed to belong to all of us. I confronted her privately at first. I gave her a chance to fix it. She laughed. She said I didn't have the guts to do anything. She said Dad would crush me if I tried. She was right about one thing. My father did try to crush me. When I told the lawyer, the entire family turned on me. They said I had no loyalty. They said I ruined everything. My father shouted that I had betrayed my blood. My mother cried like I had killed someone. My brother said nothing. He always said nothing. And then they cut me out. They didn't just stop calling. They erased me. No invitations, no birthdays, no holidays, no family news. It was like I had died. The only time my father ever spoke to me was through cold legal letters reminding me that he wanted to buy my share of the trust. He thought if he kept pushing, I'd cave. I didn't. That was the only power I had left, and they hated me for it. I ran my fingers along the edges of the papers. My grandmother's neat signature at the bottom of the will, the notarized seal, the ownership statement. Every detail was a reminder that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their table. I didn't need their fake forgiveness. I had been walking around for years, acting like I was still waiting for their love. But what if I stopped waiting? What if I stopped pretending they would ever see me as anything other than the traitor? I opened my laptop and started drafting the documents. It wasn't hard. I had already done the research years ago when things were at their worst. I knew exactly what steps to take. Dissolving the property ownership, reassigning the funds, triggering the clauses my father never thought I'd use. He thought I was weak, that I'd always want to belong. That was his biggest mistake. The sound of my fingers on the keyboard filled the room. It felt like something was coming undone inside me. Not in a painful way, in a freeing way. As I worked, I thought about the Thanksgiving nights from when we were kids. I thought about how perfect they looked on the outside. My mother loved perfection. She wanted the neighbors to envy us. She wanted people at church to talk about how close we were. But underneath it was something rotten. We were all playing parts. My father was the patriarch. My mother was the warm hostess. My sister was the golden child. My brother was the quiet one. And I was supposed to be the loyal, grateful child who never made waves. It worked for a while, until I refused to lie for them. My father built his image like a house of cards. He taught us that appearances were everything, that family was a brand, not love, a brand. The house in Georgia wasn't just a home, it was his stage. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, he put on a show, and everyone knew their lines. Everyone except me. I remember the year before everything blew up. We sat around that same table. My sister was already planning her fake marriage then. She told everyone she was in love with a man no one ever met. My father toasted to her happiness. My mother cried with joy. My grandparents said it was a blessing. My brother nodded like he always did. I watched it all and felt sick. I knew it wasn't real. I saw the way her eyes slid away every time someone asked about him. I saw the way she tensed when someone suggested they couldn't wait to meet him. I knew, but no one wanted to know the truth. When I told the lawyer the truth, I didn't just break her lie. I broke their entire performance, and they hated me for it. So when I walked through that door this year, and they stood up and left, they weren't just punishing me for that moment. They were punishing me for refusing to play my part, for daring to exist outside their story. That was why the silence cut so deep. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about control. The clock on my wall ticked louder as the night dragged on. I finished the draft of the documents. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. It wasn't because I was happy. It was because I finally saw things clearly. I wasn't going to spend another year waiting for people who had decided I didn't matter. I was going to end their control, and I was going to do it on my terms. The next morning, I woke up early. The sunlight slipped through the blinds, cutting across the floor in pale gold stripes. I made coffee, sat at the table, and read through everything one more time. Every word felt sharp, final. My grandmother had given me this power to protect myself, and I was finally using it. It wasn't revenge, it was self-preservation. My father thought he could shame me into silence. He forgot I could speak louder than his silence ever could. I put the papers in a neat folder and called my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. He had been with the family long before the betrayal, so he knew everything. He spoke carefully, always afraid of stepping on my father's toes. But today it was different. Today it was my call. I told him exactly what to do. He didn't question me. Maybe he heard something in my voice. Maybe he had been waiting for this moment as much as I had. After the call, I sent the final email. The documents went out to every relevant party. My father would wake up to find his control slipping through his fingers. The trust was being separated. My ownership was being exercised fully. The property he used for his deals would no longer be tied to his name. The family would have to stand on their own. I pictured his face when he read it. The anger, the disbelief, the way he would grip the edge of his desk like he always did when things didn't go his way. It didn't make me happy, but it made me feel steady. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting to their cruelty. I was acting. I thought about my sister, about the way she smirked when she opened the door on Thanksgiving night, the way she didn't say anything because she didn't have to. She thought she had won. She thought walking out of that room meant she had the power. She didn't. She had spent years living off that trust money. She built her entire life on it. She bought the SUV, the house, the clothes. She lived in the glow of being the golden child while pretending her marriage wasn't a lie. She had no idea the ground she stood on belonged partly to me. And now, it was about to shift. When my phone buzzed a few hours later, it wasn't a surprise. My father always moved fast when control slipped. I let it ring. He called again. Then my mother, then my sister. I didn't answer any of them. I watched the calls pile up on the screen. I imagined them sitting in that house in Georgia, realizing the weight of what I had done. They used silence to punish me. Now they were learning how it felt to be on the other side of it. I opened my laptop again and watched the confirmation emails come in, legal filings submitted, notifications sent, accounts updated. It was happening in real time. My father always thought power was about who shouted the loudest, but real power is quiet. It's the kind that doesn't need to explain itself. It's the kind that moves while the other person is still catching up. Now this is where I did something that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was cutting them off from the foundation they used to keep me in line. I hired the legal team to execute everything without delay. I sent the notice that would end their control over the trust. I made the decision to take away the property they had taken for granted for years. I didn't do it out of rage. I did it because the silence at that Thanksgiving table made one thing clear. They saw me as nothing. So I decided to become something they couldn't ignore. I didn't check social media. I didn't want to see the performance I knew was coming. My mother would post something about family values. My sister would post some staged picture with a caption about loyalty. My father would make a speech somewhere, pretending he was still in charge. But none of that mattered. The paper trail was real. The power was real. The foundation beneath their performance was crumbling. That afternoon, I walked through the city. It was chilly but sunny, the kind of late November day that makes your breath fog and your hands ache if you forget gloves. People walked past me with shopping bags and cups of hot drinks. No one knew that my entire family was probably screaming into phones at that moment. No one knew that the balance of power had shifted overnight. I felt invisible in the best way. Untouchable. I passed a bakery that smelled like cinnamon rolls. For a second, it reminded me of my mother's kitchen. I almost walked inside, but then I remembered the way she looked at me years ago when I told the truth. It wasn't love. It was betrayal in her eyes. Betrayal because I had broken the image she spent her life protecting. I kept walking. My phone buzzed again. A text from my brother. Short. Just my name. I didn't answer. He had always been the quiet one. He never stood up for me. He never spoke against me either. He just floated along, always choosing the path of least resistance. I used to envy that. Now I pitied it. He would always be stuck in their shadow. By the time the sun dipped below the buildings, the calls had stopped. The silence returned, not the sharp silence from Thanksgiving night. A different kind. A silence where they finally understood I wasn't playing their game anymore. I knew my father. He would call the lawyer. He would shout. He would threaten. He would try to make it about family loyalty. But loyalty means nothing when it's built on lies. That night, I cooked myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread. I sat at my small kitchen table with the soft hum of the city outside. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outcast. I felt like someone who had finally walked away from a story that never belonged to them. I thought about the empty dining room, the turkey, the candles, the way they had stood up and walked out. That image would stay with me forever. But it didn't sting as much now. It felt like the closing scene of a play I no longer had to act in. I cleaned up slowly, savoring the quiet. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not explanations, not apologies, not silence. I had spent too many years trying to earn a place at their table. I didn't need it anymore. I had built my own table. It was smaller, quieter, but it was mine. When I woke up the next morning, I expected a storm. My father was never the kind of man who accepted silence. He believed problems were solved with pressure, force, and control. He had spent his whole life bending people around him like branches, and anyone who didn't bend, he snapped. So I knew the storm was coming, and I was ready. The first message came from my sister. She didn't bother with greetings or soft words. The text was long, but I didn't read it all. I saw enough in the first few lines to know exactly what it said. It was full of outrage, guilt-tripping, and the usual reminders of how I was the one who destroyed everything. It was the same old story, wrapped in a new layer of panic. She depended on that trust money more than anyone else. Without it, her perfect life cracked. The second message came from my mother. Her tone was different, softer. She always played the role of the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over while quietly enabling my father's control. She begged me to think of the family, to not make things worse. She wrote about how Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time for forgiveness. It was almost funny reading that after what they did at the table. I didn't reply. The third message came from my father. It wasn't a message, it was a voicemail. He never texted. He preferred the weight of his voice. I didn't listen to it right away. I stared at the notification for a long time. I knew exactly how it would sound. His voice low and controlled, the way it always got when he was angry but didn't want to show it. He'd say I was being dramatic. He'd say I was hurting the family. He'd say I'd regret this. He'd say I'd never be forgiven if I didn't undo what I did. It was the same script he'd used my whole life. I deleted the voicemail without listening. The silence after that was better. Not peaceful, but solid. A kind of quiet I could lean against. For so many years, I had lived in the shadow of their expectations. Even when I was alone, their voices lived in my head. But not anymore. Now their anger was just noise on a screen. I went for a walk through the park near my building. The air was cold and crisp. The trees were mostly bare, their branches reaching into the gray sky like thin fingers. People passed me with dogs, kids, coffee cups. Life kept going, completely unaware of the war happening in a Georgia family behind closed doors. That thought gave me a strange kind of comfort. My family had spent years acting like their drama was the center of the universe, but it wasn't. The world didn't care about my father's control or my sister's lies. Outside their house, their power meant nothing. When I got back home, the real storm hit. Not through texts or calls, but through lawyers. My father moved fast, just like I knew he would. He tried to file an emergency motion to block my actions. He tried to freeze everything. He tried to force me to undo what I had done. But I had spent years preparing for this moment. My lawyer was already 3 steps ahead of him. Every move he made was met with a wall he couldn't break. I imagined him in his office, red-faced, slamming his hand against the desk the way he used to when we were kids. He hated losing. He hated anyone challenging him. And more than anything, he hated the idea that I, the traitor, the one he had written off, was the one who could actually bring his empire down. The thought didn't make me happy, but it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since I was a child. My sister started posting online that day. I didn't follow her, but I saw the screenshots. She wrote long, vague posts about betrayal, about how family should come first, about people who destroy everything for their own ego. Her friends flooded the comments with support, telling her she was strong. They didn't know the truth. She'd never tell them the truth. She'd never admit she built her perfect image on a lie. I let her talk. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My mother tried calling again that night. This time I answered. Not because I wanted to hear her apologies. I knew there wouldn't be any. I answered because I wanted to hear how far they'd go to protect their image. Her voice was soft. She asked how I was. I didn't give her anything. She danced around the topic at first. She talked about the weather, about how the house felt empty without everyone there, as if it hadn't been them who left me standing alone in that room. Finally, she said it. She asked me to fix what I'd done. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say we were wrong. She didn't even say my name like it meant something. She said the family was suffering. She said my father was furious. She said my sister was devastated. She said they were all worried about how this would look. That last part was the truth. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their reputation. They had turned Thanksgiving into a performance, and I had ruined the finale. I told her I wasn't going to undo anything. My voice was steady, calm. I could hear the breath catch on the other end of the line. She didn't expect that. She expected the old me, the one who wanted to please them, the one who folded under the weight of their disappointment. But that person was gone. She asked me why I was being so cruel. I almost laughed. I thought about the silence at that table, about the way they stood up and walked out like I was invisible, about the years of being the family scapegoat. I thought about how they had chosen control over love every single time. And then I told her the truth. I wasn't being cruel. I was being done. The call ended with her whispering that I would regret this, that I was going to be alone. The thing she didn't understand was that I had already been alone for years. I had just been pretending otherwise. After that, the days blurred together. The legal battle picked up, but it wasn't a real fight. My father was flailing. His lawyers threw everything they could at me, but I had every document, every clause, every piece of proof lined up. He had built his power on the assumption that no one would ever challenge him. He never prepared for the day someone did. My sister sent more messages. She begged. Then she insulted. Then she begged again. She said I was ruining her life. She said she had nothing without the trust. She said I was doing this out of spite. What she didn't say was that she brought this on herself, that she built her entire comfort on something she stole. She never apologized. Not once. My brother finally reached out too. He sent a long text about how this was tearing the family apart. He said he understood why I was angry, but I should let it go. That was always his way. Float above the mess. Pretend neutrality was the same as innocence. He asked me to meet with him. I said no. I didn't owe him a conversation. He had 3 years to stand up for me. He didn't. He didn't get to act like a mediator now. As the noise from them grew louder, my world got quieter. I went to work. I went to the gym. I cooked. I slept. I walked through my city without looking over my shoulder. For the first time, I wasn't living with their weight pressing down on me. They had spent years controlling my identity. Now they couldn't even reach me. I started remembering things I had forced myself to forget. Like the first time my father made me choose between telling the truth and protecting the family. I was 15. My sister had cheated on a school exam. The school called. My father sat me down and told me to lie for her. He said family came before everything. I did it. I lied. And that was the moment I learned the rule. Protect the image no matter what. That rule had shaped everything. It was the foundation of who we were. I had spent my life living by it, until the day I didn't. Thanksgiving night wasn't the first time they tried to erase me. It was just the most public. When I exposed my sister's fake marriage, they stopped talking to me. When I didn't sell my share of the trust, they spread stories about me. They told relatives I was unstable. They told family friends I was greedy. My mother would cry in front of people and talk about how hard it was to have a difficult child. My father would shake his head like a disappointed patriarch. My sister would play the victim. They turned me into a villain long before that night. But now their story didn't matter. It didn't matter what they told people. It didn't matter what they posted online. It didn't matter what they whispered at church. The power they used to control the narrative came from the same structure I now controlled. I had taken it back without yelling, without begging, without needing their approval. And they hated that more than anything. I got another letter from their lawyer 2 weeks later. It was full of threats dressed up as legal jargon. It was supposed to scare me. I smiled when I read it, not because I was happy, but because I had finally reached a point where their threats didn't work anymore. I sent it straight to my lawyer. I didn't even think twice. My father called again. I didn't answer. My sister left a voicemail sobbing. I didn't listen. My mother sent me a long email about how families were supposed to stick together. I deleted it without reading past the first line. They thought this was still a negotiation. It wasn't. It was over. I started noticing the changes slowly. My sister sold the SUV. My father postponed a big business deal that relied on the property I had pulled. My mother started calling relatives more often, probably to control the story. My brother stayed quiet. He always stayed quiet. They were unraveling, not because of me, but because their entire foundation had been built on a lie and my silence, and I wasn't silent anymore. One night, about 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and thought about what it meant to burn a bridge. People talk about it like it's something wild and impulsive, but this wasn't wild. It wasn't reckless. It was slow, precise. It was walking away from a structure I had spent my whole life inside. It was letting it fall. I thought about my grandmother a lot during those weeks. She had been the only one who ever saw through the performance. She never said much, but she always looked at my father like she knew exactly who he was. When she left me her share of the trust, she told me in a quiet voice that I might need it one day to protect myself. I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. It wasn't about money. It was about power. It was about refusing to let their silence define me. They thought they could humiliate me into submission. They thought standing up and walking out of that room would make me desperate for their approval again. But all it did was remind me that I didn't need their table. I didn't need their stage. I had my own. I started building a new life in the spaces they couldn't touch. I reconnected with old friends they had pushed away. I signed up for a ceramics class I always wanted to take. I traveled to a city I loved without telling anyone. Every step away from them felt like air filling my lungs after years of holding my breath. I wasn't waiting for their permission anymore. Their calls became less frequent over time. The panic dulled into bitterness. I could feel it in the way my sister's messages got shorter. My father's threats turned into silence. My mother's pleas turned into guilt trips. They were losing their grip. And I wasn't going back. One afternoon, my brother showed up at my apartment. He had never done that before. He stood in the hallway like he wasn't sure if I'd slam the door in his face. I thought about it, but I opened the door. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in height, but in presence. He had always been a shadow in our family. Never the villain, never the hero, just someone trying to stay out of the line of fire. He told me they were falling apart, that Dad was furious, that Mom was crying all the time, that our sister couldn't handle the change. I listened. He said they missed me. I almost laughed. I told him they didn't miss me. They missed controlling me. He didn't argue. He knew it was true. He asked me to come to Christmas dinner. I asked him if he was serious. He said it could be a chance to talk. I told him Thanksgiving was my answer. I told him I didn't want to talk anymore. He didn't know what to say. He stood there for a while, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then he left. That was the last time I saw him. As December turned into January, the family's anger turned into quiet resentment. They still hated what I did, but they couldn't do anything about it. My father hated being powerless. My sister hated not being the golden child anymore. My mother hated that her perfect image cracked. My brother hated the discomfort of it all. And I felt lighter than I ever had. By the time spring came, it was as if the Thanksgiving scene had carved itself into my memory like a scar. It wasn't just a holiday moment anymore. It was a line in the sand. There was life before that night, and there was life after. I used to think family meant something unshakable. I used to believe that no matter how broken things got, blood would anchor us together. But standing alone at that long table with the untouched turkey in front of me, I realized blood was just red. It wasn't a bond. It was just proof that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who will crush you without hesitation. The legal storm had settled by then. My father finally realized that no amount of threats or posturing would change the outcome. I held what they needed, and I wasn't going to give it back. His pride wouldn't let him admit defeat out loud, but his silence was its own kind of surrender. My sister went from raging to pretending none of it happened, posting photos online of her new chapter like she hadn't spent months begging me to undo everything. My mother tried the guilt strategy one last time in February. It didn't work. She told me family wasn't supposed to fall apart like this. I told her family wasn't supposed to walk away from their child like I didn't exist. That ended the call. But the real climax didn't come through legal papers or long, guilt-laden calls. It came through the silence. They had built their power on my compliance. And now that I wasn't playing the part, they didn't know what to do. My father had always been the one pulling the strings, but he couldn't pull mine anymore. And the rest of them didn't know how to function without his control, holding everything together. It was strange watching something so big and loud become so small. One night in early March, I got an email from my father. It was short. There were no insults, no commands, no threats. Just a line saying he hoped one day I'd realize what I'd done to the family. That was it. No warmth, no attempt at repair. Just the same cold, hollow tone he'd used my entire life. I stared at the email for a long time. A year ago, that message would have ripped me open. I would have replayed it in my head 1,000 times, wondering if I really was the villain. But now? It didn't make me flinch. It didn't even make me sad. It just confirmed what I already knew. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a piece of his legacy that slipped out of his grip. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, my sister sent a message that felt different. She said she hated what I did, but she understood why I did it. I didn't know if it was real or just another attempt to reel me back in. It was too late to matter. She had been the loudest that night, pushing her chair back with that smug little smirk on her face, walking out like I was nothing but a stain on her perfect world. I could still see that moment every time I closed my eyes. Forgiveness might be something other people can hand out like candy, but for me, that night was a boundary carved in stone. She tried to ask if we could meet for coffee. I said no. I didn't owe her closure. She had her chance to stand with me years ago. She chose her own comfort over my dignity, and that wasn't something that could be undone with a latte and a few empty words. My mother's calls became less frequent. At first, she had called every day, then once a week, then every few weeks. I think she realized I wasn't coming back. She never apologized, not once. She wanted to patch over everything with soft words and nostalgic memories, as if pretending nothing happened could erase the way she stared at her plate while everyone stood up that night, refusing to even look at me. That memory burned. It wasn't rage that burned anymore. It was clarity. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. My father's health started to decline in April. He wasn't old, but decades of living with a constant iron grip over everything had taken its toll. He wasn't the kind of man who handled weakness well. When my mother called to tell me he was in the hospital, she didn't say she wanted me there. She said he expected me there, as if after everything I was supposed to show up like the obedient child he had spent his whole life trying to mold. I didn't go. That decision shocked them more than anything else I'd done. In their world, no matter how bad things got, you always came home when the patriarch demanded it. But I wasn't living in their world anymore. I had my own. I thought about that hospital room. I pictured my father lying there, surrounded by people who still orbited around him, people who would never challenge him. I pictured my mother sitting in that stiff chair, clutching her hands like a woman who built her whole identity around protecting someone else's power. I pictured my sister, teary-eyed, not because she loved him, but because she didn't know what her life looked like without him controlling it. And then I pictured myself there, standing in that room like a ghost. No, I wasn't going to give them that power again. When my mother realized I wasn't coming, she left me a message saying I was heartless, that I was letting the family fall apart, that I would regret this for the rest of my life. She didn't understand that I already mourned this family years ago. Thanksgiving just made it official. The weeks passed, and my father's condition stabilized. He didn't die. And maybe that's what made the moment even sharper. He didn't have some dramatic, soft, deathbed apology in him. He didn't have some hidden well of love he was waiting to reveal. He was the same man he had always been, a man who valued control over connection. My sister hosted a family gathering that summer. She didn't invite me, of course, but I saw the photos online, the long table, the smiling faces, the carefully curated captions about family being everything. It made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. They were trying to rebuild the image without me. And they probably would. They'd keep pretending everything was perfect, because pretending was what they did best. But this time, I wasn't on the outside looking in with pain in my chest. I was just free. They could keep their table. I didn't want a seat anymore. In June, I sold the last piece of property tied to the trust. It was the lake house we used to go to every summer when I was a kid. That house held a lot of memories, some good, many bad. It was where my father first told me I'd never be as good as my sister. It was where my mother told me to keep my mouth shut about things that shouldn't leave the family. It was where I learned to build silence around myself like a wall. Selling it wasn't about the money. It was about cutting the last string. I went up there one last time before the sale closed. The lake was still, the water like glass. The dock creaked the way it always did. The house smelled like wood and old summers. For a moment I stood on that dock and let myself feel everything. The anger, the betrayal, the grief, the relief. I whispered goodbye to something that had been rotting for years, and then I walked away. The check from that sale cleared a week later. I didn't need the money, but it gave me options. I decided to move. I packed my apartment, said goodbye to the city that had held my chaos, and drove west until I hit a place that didn't have any of their fingerprints on it. A quiet coastal town where no one knew my name, where no one knew the story of the girl who got left behind at Thanksgiving. Starting over wasn't easy. The silence at night was heavy sometimes. There were moments when the memories crept in, the sound of chairs scraping back from that table echoing in my head like a ghost. But over time, the sound got quieter. The wound stopped bleeding. It didn't disappear, but it became something I could live with. A scar that reminded me of where I'd been, not something that kept me chained to it. I made new friends, not the kind who demanded loyalty as proof of love, the kind who showed up because they wanted to, not because they needed to control me. I learned to celebrate holidays on my own terms. That first Thanksgiving in my new town, I cooked a small meal for myself. Just one plate, no long table, no performance, just quiet. I sat at that table, lifted my glass, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I know some people would say I should have forgiven them. That family is family. That I should have gone to the hospital. That I should have taken the olive branch, even if it was fake. But those people don't know what it's like to spend your entire life being told you're the problem just because you refuse to bow. They don't know what it's like to stand in a room full of people who share your blood and realize not one of them sees you as a person. That night, at that Thanksgiving table, my family didn't just humiliate me. They showed me who they really were. And once you see people for who they are, you can't unsee it. I've replayed that moment in my head more times than I can count. The sound of my sister's chair sliding back, the rustle of napkins being placed on the table, the quiet shuffle of their footsteps as they filed out like a well-rehearsed play, the air going cold, the way the light hit the untouched food, the way I stood there frozen, waiting for someone to turn around. No one did. Not my mother, not my father, not my siblings, not anyone. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't even about the holiday. It was about power. It was about making sure I knew I would never be welcome unless I played my role. And that night, I decided I wasn't playing anymore. I've had people ask me since then if I ever miss them. The truth is complicated. Sometimes I miss the idea of family. I miss the illusion I clung to when I was younger. I miss thinking that one day, if I just worked hard enough, they'd love me for who I was. But I don't miss them. I don't miss the weight of their expectations. I don't miss the manipulation. I don't miss the silence that always came when I spoke the truth. I don't miss shrinking myself to fit their narrative. The last time I heard from my father was a short, emotionless message on my birthday. He said he hoped I was doing well. I didn't reply. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to run back. I just let it sit there in my inbox like a relic from another life. My sister still posts about family. She still plays the golden child. She still has friends who tell her she's strong and loyal. I let her. Her performance isn't my problem anymore. My mother still tries to paint herself as the victim. My brother still floats on the sidelines, pretending neutrality makes him clean. None of that touches me now. I know there will come a day when someone from that family will show up again, maybe with a softer voice, maybe with a new excuse, maybe with a story about how time heals everything. But time doesn't heal things you refuse to face. And I'm done carrying the burden of their refusal. I have my own traditions now, my own table, my own peace. That doesn't mean the pain disappeared. It means I decided my pain didn't owe them anything anymore. I used to think strength meant fixing broken things. Now I know strength sometimes means walking away from them. That Thanksgiving night didn't break me. It freed me. It took everything I thought I wanted and stripped it down to the truth. And the truth is, I was never really part of that family. I was just someone they tolerated as long as I stayed quiet. When I stopped being quiet, they stood up and walked out. And I let them. So here I am a year later, sitting in a home that feels like mine for the first time in my life, looking out at the ocean and thinking about how strange it is that peace doesn't come with noise or applause. It comes with stillness. It comes with choosing yourself, even when it costs you everything. It comes with knowing that being alone isn't the same as being abandoned. It comes with knowing that walking away from their table was the best thing I ever did. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to cut the entire family out of my life permanently, because this decision didn't just shatter the family image they built around control. It ended their grip on me forever, turned my father's empire upside down, and left my sister scrambling to hold together a lie that had been cracking for years. And I'm sure they won't be inviting me to their next Thanksgiving this year.